Well, Floyd, I really appreciate you taking time out from your busy schedule to be with me on this program. I want to talk a little bit about racism and spiritual renewal, and really my thoughts are prompted by a letter I received from you, which talked a little bit about your own prayer and fasting in relationship to the question of racism in our community and calling for cooperation with the members of the white clergy in the city and so on. So I would like to ask you a little bit, first of all, about what prompted that letter and something about your fast and personal discipline and so on.
Jim, as you know, back on the 30th of August of this year, following a real tragedy that struck home to me, two young men who were my lawn boys in a sense, and also who had worked for me in other areas, were gunned down execution style. And I vowed not to eat any solid food and stay in my house until I had received what I considered a clear message and a workable method, one by which I would stand and to which I would dedicate my whole life, seeking and searching for some answer to the madness that had engulfed our community. On the 15th day of the fast, Reverend Robert Cup came by my home, and we prayed together and cried together and shared together. And we opened the Bible to Mark 11 and 24, in which Jesus said, all that is required is that you really believe and have no doubt. And then he said, if you can believe that you have already received that for which you ask, it is yours. But, he said, when you pray, you must forgive all of those against whom you are holding a grudge. And then we shared the 6th chapter of Matthew, where Jesus said, if you are standing at the altar in the temple and about to offer your gift, and there remember that your brother has aught against you, leave your gift and go and be reconciled to your brother. And Jim, like a ton of bricks, that really hit me. Bob and I just held each other and cried and prayed again. And then I sat down, and I had my secretary to call everybody that I felt had anything against me, however minute I thought it was. And I invited them to my home, and I asked them for forgiveness. And when the fast ended on the 18th, and incidentally, that clear message and that workable method did not come until I had done that. And around the 17th day, it was clear to me. The answer, God said, in essence, was spiritual renewal, educational excellence, and economic empowerment. And so when I emerged from the fast, the first thing that I said at my news conference was, if I have offended anybody by my past rhetoric, however well-intentioned it was, I ask your forgiveness. Unfortunately, neither the electronic media or the printed media bothered to report that. And that, for me, was the most important thing. I subsequently sat down and wrote to several of my white fellow clergymen and expressed a similar thought to them. Since then, of course, we've been meeting with white ministers and talking about the issues that all of us must now face. And I'm more excited now about life. However difficult things may appear to be, I'm more excited about it now because God not only cleansed my body, He not only freed my spirit and sharpened my senses, but He broadened my view of life and gave me a deeper respect for people whose views I may not agree with.
Well, Floyd, let's take up one part of what you said there, and that is that talk of the spiritual renewal. One part of the program that you see that's necessary in overcoming violence in our community, overcoming racism, is what we call a spiritual renewal. And it strikes me that one of the problems we have in the minority communities is precisely a loss of hope. A sense of hopelessness. I think you've talked about this yourself, that people often sense, well, there's no way out. I'm imprisoned in this situation. I don't know how I would ever make it economically or how I would ever find the kind of housing that I want. You have a line that struck me, that many of the people trapped in this kind of living neither respect life nor fear death. And I think that is really an important thing for us to spend some time on here, to try to get a feel for how minorities experience their life today, and especially members of the Afro-American community that you represent, that sense of hopelessness. I think we need to try to get a feel for what that is like before we try to look for ways that we're going to accomplish some sort of spiritual renewal.
Well, Jim, prior to my fasting, and in fact for the greater part of my vacation this past summer, I spent with young men both at the Child Study Institute and the Lucas County Jail. And incidentally, between 65 and 70% of all of the young men at CSI are black, and more than 55% of those housed in the Lucas County Jail are black, and yet we represent less than 6% of the Lucas County population and around 18% of the city's population. Well, I spent a great deal of my time listening to them, and if there's any one thing that came clear to me, it was this: these young men find themselves in a world of hopelessness, trapped by conditions that they did not create and cannot change. They feel confronted by a hostile society that does not care what they think, how they live, or how they die. And so they find themselves at a point of desperation where they don't think that anybody votes for them, so they don't bother to vote for anybody. They don't feel that anybody cares about them, so they don't care about anybody. And at this point of desperation, they neither fear death nor respect life. I ask myself over and over again, what is the way out of this? How do you give people hope in the midst of this kind of economic deprivation?
Floyd, before we move to that side of it, let me just try to get a greater sense of this situation. I think what many people would say is something like, well, are they really imprisoned in this way? You know, one of your lines was that they're in a situation not of their own making. And I think that one sort of response you would often hear from the white community would be something like, well, is this really true? Are there not opportunities? Are there not ways for them to break out of this situation? Can they not do a better job of taking advantage of opportunities? I think that I remember Jesse Jackson saying at one time, I think in addressing a black audience, that, well, there's certain doors that are there for us and that are open. What we have to be prepared to walk through them. We have to be ready to take advantage of these opportunities. And I think that would be one sort of analysis of the situation that you would probably encounter in talking directly with the white community. Where is the greater sense of responsibility or taking hold in this situation? Are they really? I remember a line from West Side Story that said something about we are depraved on account of we're deprived. It's sort of a social engineering notion that we're totally programmed by the society in which we live. It would seem important for us to craft an answer to that kind of point that I think is often heard among people who are in the mainstream, who are not on the margins and don't really know what it's like to be in that situation.
Let me try and put that whole question into some kind of historical perspective. Jim, for the first time in our history in this country, this generation of young people will not do as well as the last. My father's father told him, if you work hard, if you study hard, things are going to be better for you. And they were better for him. Then he told me, Floyd, things are going to be better for you. And you can make it in spite of it all. And things have been better for me. But Jim, I have 4 children. And I cannot sit here and honestly look at you and say, I think things are going to be better for my children than they have been for me. Unless there is not only a change in their attitude, but a change to the world, but a change in the attitude of the world toward them. I came from a very strong religious family. My father was a minister, still is, but retired. I have 3 brothers that are ministers. My whole family was rooted and grounded in the Christian faith. Strong family ties. There are 12 of us. No one of us has ever been to jail. Well, I take that back. I've been once, but it was because of some civil rights activities. But I've never been involved in any kind of criminal activities. However, I'm not going to look at that and say, well, everybody else can do it because my family did it. Because the children who are in trouble now, Jim, don't come from the same backgrounds. Their family ties have been broken. Many of them are children or the children of children. They don't have the religious ties and backgrounds. And so they're caught up in this whole world that's foreign to them. When I was growing up, the greatest influence in the lives of children was the home, then the church, then the school, then their peers, and then television. By 1990, all of that had changed. Kids now are influenced by television, then by their peers, then by the home, then by the school, and finally by the church. And so when you take into consideration everything that's involved in this process now, the answers are not easy, the solutions are difficult, and children face the kind of peer pressures that we didn't have back in those days.
Floyd, let me look at that again in a historical context. When we look at the situation of African Americans in the United States, we had a terrible system of slavery which essentially and on purpose tried to destroy the black family life. I mean, that was part of the overall strategy. Right. Now, in the midst of that, it seems as though the black community, after the time of slavery, gathered itself, kept the family, much as you're talking about there. I mean, under remarkably difficult circumstances, kept alive the sense of the intact family, brought it back together. And I believe, for example, that the rate of illegitimacy up into our own century was relatively low. And it appears as though in our own time that has changed. The rate of illegitimacy is up. The breakdown of the intact two-parent family, of course, that's across the board in the society, where divorce is more rampant and so on. Illegitimacy is up. But that history seems questionable to me. Or, I think one, as an outsider, sees a real sea change in the black community on this question of the intact family and of fathers being present to raise their children and so on. And I wondered if you wanted to comment on that.
That brings us to the whole issue of spiritual renewal. What has happened, Jim, is during the days of slavery for 250 years, when we were torn apart, when there was a brand on our chests, chains on our ankles, from the rising of the sun in the morning until the setting in the evening, we worked, and our only reward was to live another day if we did not rebel. But we never lost sight on our faith. we held on to our faith in God, and God held on to us. It was the one thing that we never gave up, and that one thing that we had in common gave to us the kind of relationship to each other that was very special and unique. We were not afraid of each other. We were afraid for each other. We didn't turn on each other. We turned to each other. There was this common bondage, and there was this common faith. For the next 100 years after slavery, the dark days of segregation, the one thing that we still held on to was our faith in God. And it was the underpinning of our family structure. We not only enjoyed a unique, and it's difficult sometimes for me to talk about this, a unique family. That was the extended family. That was grandmama and granddaddy, and that was Aunt Susie and Uncle Bill. And
all of that helped to hold you together.
That's right.
To keep it together, even in really difficult times.
That's right.
Yes.
And even people who were not members of the immediate or extended family, we saw ourselves as one family, as a race of people. And so, if the lady down the lane saw my brother in trouble, she went to him. If she needed to discipline him, she disciplined him. And there was appreciation by my family. Not anger, not resentment, but appreciation. And we've got to get back there.
And I take it that is part of what you think has happened here, that has gone badly.
That's correct.
That within the black community, that some of that traditional faith that led to this care and concern has been lost. In other words, you sense that among the young people today, and the young black males, for example, that they have lost some of that spiritual rooting and that fundamental faith in God. Is that the further analysis that we're getting here?
That's right. And real faith in God. And I'm not talking about some namby-pamby,
right, yeah.
girlish,
we're talking about a strong Christian faith.
I'm talking about the kind of faith that allows you to be meek without being weak. It allows you to be pressed down on every hand, but not destroyed. It allows you to be persecuted, but know that you have not been forsaken. It allows you to be knocked down, but not knocked out. It's the kind of faith that will give you the strength to endure hardships, the courage to fight the conditions which produce the hardships, and at the same time the love to forgive those who are responsible for those hardships. Now,
Boy, do we know that any statistics on black youth attending church? The context for that, for me, is this: that I remember when I was in Bowling Green and we were having certain racial problems on the campus, and we were having a lot of trouble dealing with them. And at that time, a number of black ministers came from Toledo to Bowling Green, because there weren't any in Bowling Green, as I remember it, and talked to the black students. I was present when that happened. And I remember the tremendous respect that the young black people had. Now, this is like late 60s, I'm thinking, early 70s, when this happened. The tremendous respect that they showed, and they really actually listened to what the black ministers had to say. It was though as they had sort of a predisposition to be linked in with the church, and that somehow in their own heritage they were drawing on that. I did not know if those black young people went to church regularly or not, but I saw that general relationship. That was very impressive to me, I must say. Now, I guess my question is that broken down? Is that even deeper relationship with the church, apart from attendance on Sunday, is that still intact? Can we draw on it in this spiritual renewal, or is that bankrupt these days?
Well, I wouldn't say that it's bankrupt, but it's close. First of all, in Toledo alone, there are approximately 80,000 African Americans. Of those 80,000, there are only 15 to 16,000 of professed churchgoers. That includes the big churches and what we call the storefronts as well. There are few young people attending church now, any church, proportionately to what attended in the past. There are several reasons for that. Their parents now, and we talk the teenagers that are 16, 15, 16, 17 years old, etc., or the children of parents who are 30, a little over 30 years old, maybe 35 at the most. Most of them don't go to church now. So there is no insistence on the kids going. And then young people have also seen that the church has become almost irrelevant to the real problems that they face. In other words, the child who has a child now, instead of us loving that child and forgiving that child, too many of us want to see that child as a sinner and somebody that you don't have anything to do with, as opposed to looking at that child saying, you made a mistake, but we love you because God still loves you. To give you a classic example, when Mary Beth came to Toledo recently, many of my colleagues said, it's a shame. He should not be allowed to speak. After all, he was a convict. He was convicted of using drugs. So nobody should have anything to do with him. He should be an outcast. Well, my position was a very simple one. I'm a preacher. I'm not a religious entertainer. I don't ask how is it going to play in Peoria. I'm governed by how it plays in heaven. Dick Berry had a title. Marion Berry had a title. Now Marion Berry has a testimony. It's more important to me that our children listen to a man with a testimony than a man with a title. Because as once he had that title and he had the bodyguards and he could pick up the phone and call somebody and be guaranteed that his call would be returned, he had really no respect for the real values of life. But once he got knocked down and God turned him around, much like Saul was knocked down and turned around on the Damascus Road, given a new address and a new name and a new mission, he left his title, but he picked up his testimony. And what we're trying to say to these young people, look at people who made mistakes. That's all right. But look at the fact that they have not allowed the mistakes that they made to make them. And though you may be born in the slums, as Jesse Jackson puts it, the slums don't have to be born in you.
Mm-hmm. Floyd, how, when we look at that attempt to achieve this spiritual renewal, do we see ways in which the white community can cooperate with the black community in this effort? Or is this something that we sort of have to leave to you, in a sense?
Jim, black folk did not create the conditions that we've been thrust in. And I have to say that. As the documentary illustrations have placed it. We didn't create the slums. We did not create the ghetto. It was created for us. So then whites have to accept responsibility at least for creating the conditions, even though we have to accept responsibility for the way we react to those conditions and pull ourselves out of them. We are meeting now with white clergymen and with other white groups across racial lines. Whites are coming now to my church and engaging in dialogue. I'm being invited now to white groups to speak, to engage in dialogue. Father Donnelly works with me very closely now, and we're doing television programs together, and so we're really excited about this new thrust. And I certainly hope that all of us can understand that this problem is so big that it needs the respect, participation, and interest of everybody across racial lines. We cannot solve it alone, and it cannot be solved for us
So we must work together on this. I'm thinking from the viewpoint of the Catholic community that one of the good things that we do, I believe, and Father Donnelly, you mentioned, is very involved in this, is running our inner city Catholic schools, which often have a high percentage of black students, minorities, and a large percentage of students who are not Catholic. I often think that that's one of the better things we do as a religious community. I think it's a great service. I think a lot of these schools do excellent work, help prepare people, and give them some spiritual sense that they can take hold and overcome the hopelessness that often engulfs them. So I'm thinking that's one way that we can help to cooperate in all of this.
Well, if people still have hope, if they still have hope, they can overcome. Someone said that if somebody knocks you on your back or knocks you down, be sure and fall on your back, because that's the best position to be in, to look up. And as long as you look up, you can get up. And that's what the whole concept of spiritual renewal is.
Okay, Floyd. We've been talking here about the problem of racism in our own community. I really appreciate you sharing very personally out of your own sense of all of this, your own deep religious experience and your own sense of extended family. I appreciate that very much. And then I think your message is there has to be spiritual renewal, which is finally rooted in faith in God, our common Christian tradition that there is a God who loves us and cares for us, and that when we're down, when times are difficult, that this is a God who gives us grace to rebound, to come back. Accept the cross of Christ, we can expect to participate in the resurrection of Christ. Then I take seriously your challenge for the white community to work with the black community and how we can help to accomplish this. And I think your gesture of reaching out is an extremely important one in this time in our history.